Okay, so we're going to talk about Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens, today. I just wanted to talk about it. I've already reviewed Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker. That was a while ago. I was like, all right, well, I kind of want to start doing like just random movie reviews of stuff that I just want to talk about. So, whatever. I watched The Force Awakens yesterday on Disney Plus. We're going to talk about it today. Obviously, it's directed by J.J. Abrams. This was way hype when it first came out, and I was part of it too. Just getting Star Wars again, Star Wars that felt, like the original trilogy, a little too much like it. We'll talk about that. But the hype was insane, right? It made a huge amount of money. I knew people who saw it in like the double-digit amount of times. It was crazy. I remember I waited a little bit to see it until I went back home to visit, and pretty much the whole movie was spoiled for me because people just couldn't stop talking about it. We've seen that they clearly didn't have a plan, right? This is clearly a setup movie, so a lot of the things that are problems with it, you could kind of not really think about it too much because it's like, okay, well, they're still building on things. And then we find out they weren't building on anything. They bought the rights because they just knew that it would essentially print money because of the Star Wars fan base. So the story, Luke Skywalker, he's vanished. He had the new Jedi Order thing going on, but it is no more at this point because of one of his students who turned to the dark side and pretty much destroyed the new Jedi Order. Kylo Ren, played by Adam Driver in this, who turns out to be Ben Solo, Han Solo and Princess Leia's kid. And Princess Leia is now General Leia, who's leading the resistance against the First Order, which is pretty much the new Empire. They've risen from the ashes of the Empire, and they have their own version of the Death Star and stuff like that. So both sides, the First Order and the Resistance, they're really trying to find Luke Skywalker. The Resistance want his help against the First Order. The First Order wants to take him out because they see him as a threat. Poe Dameron, played by Oscar Isaac, he's part of the Resistance. He's this great pilot. He goes to Jakku to meet a contact the Resistance has that has the map to Luke Skywalker. And so he goes to meet him, he gets the map, but they get attacked by Kylo Ren and the First Order. And so he has to put the map to Luke Skywalker in his droid, BB-8. And BB-8 goes away, and he gets captured. But he gets saved by Finn, or FN-2187. I think that was his stormtrooper designation or whatever. But then he goes by Finn after that. Played by John Boyega. The stormtroopers now, they're taken from their families as kids or babies, whatever. He doesn't even remember, I guess, his actual name. So he was real young. And they're forced to be stormtroopers now. So he was on Jakku, and it was, I guess, his first battle, and he just couldn't take it. So he's defecting from the First Order. So he helps Poe Dameron escape. They steal a TIE fighter, but they get shot down. They crash land on Jakku. So BB-8 meets the protagonist of this trilogy, Rey, played by Daisy Ridley, and she protects him and makes the decision not to sell him, things like that. Poe Dameron is believed to be dead. Finn, he wakes up, changes, and then he ends up meeting Rey and BB-8, and he pretends to be part of the Resistance. So they get the stormtroopers called on them and everything. They end up getting away, and they end up unknowingly getting into the Millennium Falcon, and Han Solo picks them up. So then he decides to help them get that BB-8 unit to the Resistance so they can find Luke Skywalker. So that's pretty much the plot, or the setup of the plot. It's very derivative, and we'll talk about that in a second. I still think this movie's good. I still think it's entertaining, right? It's crowd pleasing. It's got some really great, exciting moments, but it's definitely got some problems in the writing of it. They clearly just want it to be essentially a new version of A New Hope and do the original trilogy again, but there's some problems in doing that. So we'll get to that. But positives, cinematography, right? I think this movie shot really well. I do think Last Jedi looks better. I think Last Jedi is the best looking, most interesting looking movie in this trilogy, even with the problems. Obviously, it's got its hate. I don't care for that movie that much either, but that's the top when it comes to cinematography. It might be one of the best looking Star Wars movies just in general, but this one's still really good. We still have a great score by John Williams. I really like the Rey theme, and then I really like that moment at the end when she finally finds Luke at the end and offers the old lightsaber to him, the blue lightsaber. The way the music kind of builds to that moment and everything, it's really well done. The performances are really good. The old cast and the new, and I like the characters. The old characters, like I like Han Solo and Chewbacca still. People didn't like that Han Solo went back to being a smuggler. I think for the story and all that his happened with his family and Kylo Ren and all that, I think it makes sense, and I still like him a lot. That's still my favorite character in Star Wars. Rey starts to sour on me by the second movie. She gets kind of just bland. But here, I like how she gets excited, just going on this adventure. You definitely can feel that she's been isolated on this sand planet all this time, and it's just kind of excited to be going on this adventure, going on this journey, even though she wants to get back. And so that causes conflict within her. And that's good. And I like her interactions with Finn. They start off kind of antagonistic, but then they form a bond over the course of the movie. He's lying to her about being part of the resistance. And by the time he admits it to her and says he's a stormtrooper, she doesn't care. She wants him to stay anyway. So, there's definitely an arc with these two. And Finn wants to just get away. He has this trauma, with the First Order and knows what they're capable of and is rightfully so scared of them. But he puts his life on the line and, goes to save her anyway because, they had formed a bond at that point. And I think that's really good. It seems like they were forming a romance with these two, actually, but I guess they decided not to do that. The CGI mixed with practical effects is great. The CGI, as far as the effects goes, no complaints. I don't think anything looked bad. The prequels, George just went crazy with that stuff, especially from Attack of the Clones on. It's like everything around you was just fake. The action is thrilling, it's exciting, it's crowd pleasing. J.J. Abrams is good with that, especially with these movies. Even with Rise of Skywalker being absolute trash, you can still get into the action and things like that. From a superficial level, he does a good job with those things. Kylo Ren and his story, I think it's interesting, right? Obviously, Snoke is the Emperor again, and Kylo Ren is Darth Vader again. But he actually is trying to be Darth Vader, and he can't measure up, right? And he's got this internal turmoil because he's not really able to fully embrace the dark side, and he has these like temper tantrums and things like that as a result of it. He's trying to be Darth Vader, right? He's a pretender, right? And you can get that from Adam Driver's performance and the actions of this character, and I think that's great. Just like Finn, right? We got a really interesting storyline, right, with Finn being a stormtrooper and now Kylo Ren just trying to be the new Darth Vader. But they don't do enough with it. But I mean, this is the first movie, it's set up, and I think in this movie at least, it's an interesting thing to set up. That's where we go to the bad stuff here. So we can start off with Kylo Ren since we're already on him. He wants to be essentially Darth Vader. He wants to embrace the dark side. He's hearing his grandfather's voice. He's talking to his grandfather's helmet, Vader. But it doesn't really make sense because Darth Vader turned back to the light side in the end, right? We all know that, right? Anakin's a Force ghost. He could probably come to Kylo Ren and tell him about it, and we just wouldn't have Kylo Ren. So it really takes away from that. I think a large part of what doesn't work with this movie is that it just doesn't gel well as a sequel to the original trilogy, to Return of the Jedi. Like you got, what is essentially the rebels and the Empire again. You got the Resistance and the First Order. The First Order, this is only 30 years after Return of the Jedi. I looked that up to make sure. The time frame of things, it just doesn't really make sense because I feel like even if they've been working to get this going ever since the Empire fell, right? I don't feel like they would have been able to amass all this much, especially with the New Republic around, right? I mean, they have a new Death Star that's even bigger and more powerful than the old Death Star, which is Starkiller Base.
A laser cannon.
We're not sure how to describe a weapon of this scale.
It's another Death Star.
I wish that were the case, Major. This was the Death Star. And this is Starkiller Base.
They have Death Star tech. You see that in the next movie. They are able to, I guess, take over planets and take kids away from their families to make them stormtroopers. It's like, how did they get all this happening with the New Republic around? What were they doing? Like, it's really weird. And they've done things to fill in the gaps with like the Mandalorian and things like that. But it's just not enough. Even now, just rewatching this movie, it's like the heroes. It's like Luke, Han, and Leia just never won. And if that's what you're going to do, you got to flesh that out. You got to tell us where Snow came from, how this came to be, and things like that. I know this is a setup movie, but I feel like more of that should be in this movie, right? It really should be, but you just wanted to essentially have the original trilogy again and have Rebels and the Empire because you're just lazy, and it's just insanely derivative. You have the map to Luke Skywalker being put in a droid, and then that droid finding its way to the protagonist, and the protagonist has to then take that droid to the rebel faction. In the original movie, it was the rebellion, and this is the resistance. You have certain scenes that call back to that one alien calling the stormtroopers on Han, Luke, and them before they have to leave Tatooine. Um, there's a lot. Even just keeping them straight in my head is a lot. Obviously, Rey has to get the lightsaber, the same lightsaber that was given to Luke in the original trilogy, Anakin's old lightsaber, and there's no explanation as to how they got it after it fell down Cloud City and all that. You have a demonstration of power by the new Death Star here. It's Starkiller Base by blowing up multiple planets instead of just one planet, which is what happened with Alderaan with the Death Star originally. You got an older mentor character from the previous trilogy. You got their death. And the protagonist of the new trilogy witnessing it. Lastly, and this is probably not all of it, just all that's off the top of my head right now, you do have what is essentially the new trench run to take out the new Death Star, Starkiller Base, right before they're able to blow up the Rebel base, which is what was happening at the end of A New Hope with them targeting Yavin 4. It's so similar. It's so obvious that they just took the original script or whatever from A New Hope and just was like, all right, how do we fit this into our movie? How do we make this essentially A New Hope, but with these new characters and this new situation that we have going on? But it has to make people think of A New Hope. We have to make that happen. You have the fan pandering, which is all through all three of these movies. You have them just happening into a ship that turns out to be the Millennium Falcon, and then you have fan moments for Han Solo to come on the Millennium Falcon. We're home, which was in the trailer. You get Finn picking up the training ball. You got Finn turning on the game on the Millennium Falcon, something that's also referenced in Rise of Skywalker. So I guess J.J. Abrams just loves that. And then you got Rey, who was essentially a Star Wars fan self-insert. I mean, just completely fangirling over Han Solo.
This is a Millennium Falcon. You're Han Solo.
I used to be.
This is a ship that made the Kessel Run in 14 parsecs.
12! 14.
It takes you out of the movie, and I didn't like that even from when I first saw the movie, right? Like, it being a derivative and all these other things weren't that big of an issue to me. But the movie stopping dead for moments like that, and so obviously stopping dead, almost like it's like, yeah, everybody clap. A lot of like hard nostalgia movies do that, like Spider-Man No Way Home and stuff like that, where like they stop dead because we gotta get this moment. But anyway, since we just referenced Rey, let's talk about Rey. So Rey gets a lot of flack starting with this movie. That she's perfect, she can do everything, right? Now Rey isn't perfect. She's not. But she is extremely naturally gifted. So she's already able to do certain things, right? Talk to droids, things like that. She's able to take care of herself physically, right? With her being a scavenger and potentially being attacked at any point, things like that. With her staff and all that. And she has knowledge of ships and spacecraft and things like that. But also, whenever she starts to do something new, something for the first time, she seems to be naturally able to do those things too. You have her getting into the Millennium Falcon. She does say that she has flown some ships before, but she's never gone off planet. But when she first gets into it and she's flying it, she's running into things, she's hitting the sand, and then within a little bit, she's able to fly it proficiently and do a maneuver that is insanely awesome, right? Like somebody who's been flying forever would pull something off like that, like Poe Dameron or somebody. You got the blaster that she gets from Han Solo. He gives it to her. She's like, yeah, point and shoot, right? She clearly isn't all that familiar with it, and she's fumbling around with the safety when she gets attacked and she has to use it. And she misses the first shot and then gets every one of them after that. It's like, okay, like this is, you're showing her, yeah, I guess struggling for a little bit, but there's not enough of a growth there, right? So then it just kind of makes her growth boring. Added on to that, whenever she does make a mistake, letting the Rathars loose, it turns out to be advantageous, and it's actually, able to help them get away from the people that are trying to kill them. So it just, it's too much, and it makes the character kind of boring. Even though I like her personality and things like that, and her, I actually do like the bond that's forming between Han Solo and her, but it's just like it does feel forced when she like fixes the Millennium Falcon, and he's like, "Oh wow, look at that."
What'd you do?
I bypassed the compressor.
Huh.
It definitely feels forced when Han Solo dies and she comes back and she comes off the Millennium Falcon and there's no words, right? And she just goes up to Leia and they just embrace each other. They hug. Leia doesn't even know who she is. She's never seen her before. They're strangers. Why are they embracing each other like this? Why? Because she's the protagonist of the new Star Wars trilogy. That's why. The person she actually has not only a bond with just between those two, but a shared bond with Han Solo, Chewbacca, that would make sense for him to comfort her, right? That would be the obvious choice, or at least be involved in that. It's nonsense, and it makes this character feel forced. Makes this character not really feel like an actual character. Like she's just kind of, we need a new protagonist, and this is just who we have. And the fans are gonna go crazy for these certain moments, like the mind trick and things like that. So let's just do it. With her defeating Kylo Ren, obviously he was injured and he was going through a lot internally, and she was awakening the Force at that time. I'm okay with her defeating him, just I guess in a vacuum. But when it comes to the overall trilogy, narratively, I don't think it's a good idea to have her defeat him because he's still an antagonist. He's still going to be, a villain going forward. They're going to fight again. So to have her beat him, even if the circumstances make sense, it's not a good idea because you still want him to feel like a threat. And it kind of takes away from him as a threat if we've already seen him get beaten. So, it just doesn't work. She should have gotten better over the fight and been doing better against him, and he's noticing it. And then as the planet's exploding, they get separated, which still happens. That should have been the thing. And then it's just like, okay, there'll be a rematch at some point. That should have been it. Instead of actually having her defeat him in the first movie. It's not good. It already doesn't really make sense that everybody was able to get away anyway. Like the whole thing with putting Phasma in the trash compactor, which was a callback I was okay with. But like, how was everybody able to get off that off that planet before it got destroyed? It's actually kind of nonsense.
All eyes on that TIE. We're losing power rapidly.
Get back to your station! Just look! We won't survive! Even Hux is gone!
That's it. Mainly, the problem is it's just way too derivative and lazy. It just wants to be the original trilogy again, wants to be A New Hope again, without taking into account that it doesn't really make sense if you do that because it takes away from the original trilogy that 30 years later we're in pretty much the same area, if not worse. Obviously, because Starkiller Base is even worse than the Death Star. So, you set up interesting things with these characters, certain storylines and things, but there's not enough set up even in this movie, and then it turns out to not be all that much, like the Knights of Ren and stuff like that as we go forward, because you didn't plan things out. And looking back at this movie, knowing that they just didn't really think things through, it really hurts the movie. It really does, going back looking at it. But it's still a good movie, right? I didn't even mention, right? I really like Han Solo's death scene, right? I think it's very dramatic and things like that. Even though I love that character, I think they did a good job with that, and some other things too. I think I mentioned the scene at the very end, giving the lightsaber to Luke. Very well done scene, and it gets you interested to see where things are going. There's a lot of really good stuff in this movie still, even though the overall plot has issues and is way too derivative. So, whatever. It's not great, but it's still good, right? So yeah, I'm going to give it a good enough. That is Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. And yeah, we're done.